ready to dive in. We're tackling a story that's, well, it's echoed through history, the story of Prophet Lut, or Lot, as he's called in the Bible. But we're going deep into how Islam views him, especially drawing from Story of Prophet Lut from Quran, My Islam.
And it's fascinating, because this story, it ties together faith, morality, those big questions about what we do as a society. It makes you think, like, even our actions today, they ripple out. It's not just ancient stuff.
Right. It's got that timeless thing to it. Okay, so basic intro, who was Lut? Nephew of Prophet Ibrahim, who some folks might know better as Abraham from other faiths. Can you imagine growing up with that influence? Ibrahim preaching one God and Lut right there with him sharing that belief.
And back then, that wasn't easy. People pushing back, making fun of them. But Lut, he stuck with it, shows you something about his character. And actually, that strong belief, that's what leads to him getting a huge task. At least in Islamic belief, Allah chooses him to guide the people of Sodom.
Sodom. I mean, that name alone, it's almost like a byword for, let's just say, morality gone wrong. It's like, how can a place be known for being rich and prosperous, but also so troubled?
Yeah, that contrast, it's key here. The source we're looking at, it directly links Sodom to the introduction of homosexuality, saying that's a severe transgression, like against how Allah designed things. It's really pointed about this being a totally new thing back then, like a major break from what was normal.
Okay, so you've got Lut given this mission to guide a city that's basically doing the opposite of everything he believes in. Talk about a tough job, right? But he doesn't shy away from it, does he?
No, he starts preaching, telling people to fear God, warning them about what could happen if they don't change their ways.
And he's blunt about it, too.
Yeah.
He condemns homosexuality directly, says it's not natural, goes against Allah's plan. That's how it's described in the Quran. Yeah, you can probably guess that didn't go over well with the Sodom crowd. Imagine trying to have a rational conversation with people that set in their ways. So, no surprise. Lut faces opposition, people laughing at him, even threats to kick him out. Really shows you the kind of struggles prophets had to deal with.
Totally. When you bring a message that challenges how people are used to living, what they believe deep down, there's going to be a price to pay. But it shows you how strong their faith was. Sometimes, though, even with all the warnings, you need something more, like divine intervention.
And that's where it gets really interesting. Angels, they visit Ibrahim, tell him Sodom's about to face some serious consequences. He's worried about his nephew, naturally. But the angels, they assure him, Lut's going to be all right. It's a good reminder that even when things are bad, really bad, those who keep the faith, they'll be protected.
Right. And then the story, it takes a more, dramatic turn. These angels, they disguise themselves as young guys and head into Sodom to visit Lut.
Okay, so we got this city, right, consumed by desire, immorality. And suddenly, these young men show up, even though they're angels in disguise. You could practically feel the tension building, can't you? It's like, what's going to happen?
And here's where Lut's own family, it gets pulled in. His wife, and the source makes it clear she wasn't a believer like Lut, she becomes really important to the story, but not in a good way.
It's like they say, you can't pick your family, even when you're a prophet, huh? So what does she do? Well, the story goes, she actually tells the men of Sodom about these young visitors staying at their place. And knowing Sodom, well, it's obvious she's not thinking about offering them tea and cookies, right?
Yeah, it shows you how deep those desires ran in Sodom. Even someone close to faith could get caught up in it.
It reminds you that believing, having faith, it's really personal. Even in a family, you can have these huge differences. And here, those differences, they lead to something awful.
For sure. The men of Sodom, totally driven by lust, they surround Lut's house. They're demanding to have their way with his guests. That moment, right there, that's where it all goes wrong. No respect for anything, for morality. It's a turning point.
Yeah, this is where it gets really tough to hear, honestly. Lut, he's stuck. His wife betrayed him. There's a mob outside. He pleads with them, tries to get them to see reason, talks about how you're supposed to treat guests, but they don't care.
That image, a prophet begging like that, it shows you just how messed up Sodom had become. Lut, with all his faith and this darkness all around him.
It makes you think about how easily things can fall apart, right?
Yeah.
How wanting something too much without any control, it leads to chaos. But at the same time, something's got to give, divine intervention is coming.
Exactly. Sodom's on the edge. Allah tells Lut, get out now, take your daughters. But there's this one rule, and it's huge. Don't look back, no matter what.
Can you imagine that? Fleeing for your life, knowing everything you're leaving behind. The temptation to look back. must have been immense. It really makes you think about faith, about obedience, how hard it must have been, even for Lut. Would you have been able to resist looking back?
It's that human struggle, isn't it? Trusting what you can't see versus your emotions, the pain of loss. And sadly, Lut's wife, she can't fight it. She looks back and suffers the same fate as Sodom.
It's a harsh reminder that there are consequences, and sometimes we just have to trust, even when it's hard. But the story, it keeps going. The Dead Sea, that's supposed to be like a physical sign of what happened to Sodom. Makes you think, what will be left of our civilizations? What will people in the future think when they find our ruins?
It's a big question. And the source, it wants us to connect these dots between past and present. But this story, it's not just in Islam. The Bible, both parts, they mention Sodom too.
Right, like these faiths, they share some roots.
Yeah.
Some stories go beyond any one religion.
Yeah.
But it's in the Quran where Lut, he's really important. The source even lists all the verses he's mentioned in. It's like a guide.
It is, yeah. Like you could almost trace his story through the whole book, see how it fits in,
Exactly, and that's what I like about going back to the source. You get a much clearer picture than just reading someone's summary, right?
Totally. So we've gone through the story, right? Lut, Sodom, it's heavy stuff. But what's the takeaway? What's it all mean for us, like, now?
The million-dollar question, right? It's not just some old tale. People are still arguing about this stuff, thinking about it.
Yeah.
After all this time.
Yeah, when you really think about it, there's some parts that feel, I don't know, kind of familiar to today, Societies trying to figure out what's right and wrong, desires getting out of control, people making choices that affect everyone. Makes you wonder, are we really that different from the people back then in Sodom? Worth thinking about, for sure. Makes you question your own ideas about what's right, what's fair, the choices we make by ourselves and as a whole society. What can we learn from this story? How can knowing this old stuff actually help us today, maybe even make better choices for the future?
And maybe even more important, how do we even talk about this stuff with empathy, even when we don't agree? That's the real challenge, I think, to really listen, have those tough conversations, but do it with an open mind.
It's a lifelong thing, figuring out faith, morality, what it means to be human. And Lot's story, even with all the twists and turns, it gives us a way to look at those big questions.
It really makes you think. So we'll leave you with this. How does Lot's story, looking at it from both the faithful side and the historical side, how does that change your understanding of what's right and wrong, of justice, of the consequences, when a whole society makes a choice? It's a conversation worth having, that's for sure.